Whether you're rebuilding, whether you're contending, whether you're in the middle somewhere, 25 first, 26 first, 27 first are going to be the most important assets in Dynasty Fantasy Football because they can make or break your Dynasty team. Knowing what to do with them based on your situation is going to be a very important part of playing Dynasty and also setting yourself up for success in the future. So today we're going to talk about what you should be doing with those 25 first. A lot of people don't talk about this. A lot of people don't realize some of the risks that come along with 25 first and also what they're really good for. So let's talk about first round picks in Dynasty Fantasy Football. We'll obviously focus in on 2025 first. And I'm just going to pull up a value graph for a 2025 first. You've seen even since July, even since, August, ranked as the 60th, I'd say 60th overall ranked asset in Dynasty Fantasy Football. Already up to 43rd. You continue to see, and that's a mid first. I guarantee an early first has continued to climb because what? People are getting excited about Ashton Genty and Travis Hunter and whoever else you project to go at the top of 25 rookie drafts. Is anybody's guess at this point? We don't really know yet. The point is, 25 first or first round picks in general are some of the only assets that you know exactly what their value is going to do. We're playing a value game. It's all about value in Dynasty Fantasy Football and making sure you maintain that on your teams. They're some of the only things that you know exactly what they're going to do. And we talked about this before the season. We're like, hey, once the season starts, when September hits, you're going to see whoop, because people are going to be like, oh, that's right after this year. You're also going to see an increase in first value because people will start rebuilding and they're going to want them more, right? So there's going to be a higher market demand for these picks. But when you look at 2025 first, they're so value insulated and they're so sure in terms of where they're going to go in value. It makes it one of the most valuable. Assets in Dynasty Fantasy Football. So it's good for rebuilds, good for contenders. But what should you actually be doing with those? We're going to talk about. So 25 first you can use in a couple of different ways here. Obviously, they can be valuable for down tiers for both rebuild and contend teams. Obviously, we've talked a lot about down tiers on this show, but basically it acts as value insulation for any type of trade that you're making. I want to talk specifically about what you're doing with your first if you are a contender right now, because I think a lot of people, and I felt this way early on when I was playing Dynasty, a lot of people think that you have to trade your 25 first as a contender. This is incorrect.
False.
In fact, I think of the 4 or 5 contending Dynasty leagues I'm in this year, I think I've traded one first. Whereas 4 years ago, I probably would have been trading all of my first. What I thought was that trading my first away for whoever I was getting, whether it was an old running back or a productive wide receiver or whoever, was going to give me an advantage such that I would have more of a chance to win in my playoffs than I did if I didn't trade the first. When in reality, the value of a 25 first on your roster or not, or trading it away or not, compared to getting a first round bye in the playoffs, it's pretty much nothing. Getting a bye in the playoffs is what gives you you are 50% more likely to win your league when you get a bye in the playoffs in your Dynasty leagues.
It's not like your players are being rested.
It's not. And so you talk about the flexibility of holding your first. Obviously, we're at the point in the season now where you probably should have held your first just in case, if you're 7-0 or 8-0 now, 8-0, 7-1, we are now advising people to move their first. And we'll give you some trade targets for contending teams here in a second. But basically what you see is a lot of teams automatically ship off their first. It's the wrong strategy. If you have your 25 first and you are 7-1 and 8-0, I do want to encourage you don't have to trade that first, especially if you have a lot of declining assets. And what I mean by that is you have veterans that for sure are reaching the point where their age is going to drop their Dynasty value down. Honestly, in that situation, you should be keeping your 25 first. A lot of teams that have elite value teams, most of the time on an elite value team, when we give elite value on our team blueprints, we tell those teams to ship off their first, because not only do they have the contending assets and the record, but they have the value. 25 first can be used on contending teams to make sure that you don't completely bottom out year after year, because they do give you some value even if they are late first. We talk about late first last year in Dynasty. Who were you drafting there? I got Brian Thomas probably 3 leagues at the 109 or later. I got Brock Bowers at the 111 or later in 2 leagues. It's a great strategy for making sure that your contending Dynasty team doesn't absolutely plummet. So what you can do, however, on a team where you are contending in Dynasty is you can move your 25 first and feel okay about it. Like I said, at this point, you're going to need to have a pretty good record to do that. But this is basically what you're trying to do. You're not trying to get you over the top to win your championship. You're not getting in an arms race with your other top teams in your Dynasty league, because it really makes no difference there. What you're trying to do is secure a first round bye. And so you need to be looking at the guys that you're buying and asking them, do they have a good rest of season schedule? Do they have a bye week coming up? Things like that, so that you can do everything you can to get that first round bye. So for contenders, I'm going to give you some players to target with late first or cheaper. And when I say late first, we're at the point, again, where you know that your first is going to be late. I wouldn't put a ton of teams in this category. You might say, oh, my first is definitely going to be late. It is still early enough in the season where you could go 8-7. Like, that could still happen. You could still completely hit a wall. You need to be really confident in your team. And honestly, you need to have somebody look at your team and tell you. And obviously, we can do that. But for contenders, so here are some general players to target with late first or cheaper. David Montgomery. You've seen David Montgomery move for late first. The reason we're okay with this deal is because you actually have some value insulation for David Montgomery now. And I think it makes him a good dynasty asset. He's clearly scoring a lot of points. He's stuck with a good offense for at least a couple more years. So we like that. James Cook, we've seen move for late first. We would definitely be pulling the trigger on that. I made this trade in a league. I traded my late first for James Cook. Felt very good about it. Derrick Henry obviously is going to have less value insulation, but he's straight up a league winner. So if you can pull this off, this is one that's probably going to get you a bye, or if you're in the playoffs and you don't have a bye, he's probably going to win you a week at some point. Alvin Kamara, kind of the same thing. I mean, obviously, I would lean 2 seconds here, but I think a late first is doable if it's a really late first. Josh Jacobs is a no-brainer. He's going to be under contract at least through next year, in my opinion. And I don't love his deal there in Green Bay, but I do think for a contending team, he's going to be a really solid option. And as you can see, there's a theme here, lots of veteran running backs. Veteran wide receiver for you, Terry McLaurin. I think he's a great buy in Dynasty right now for any team, but especially for contenders. He's still undervalued. And then George Kittle. If you have George Kittle on your contending Dynasty team, you are locking up that tight end spot and having a clear positional advantage there. And so for contending teams, and you can offload some of these picks if you want to and move them for some of these guys. Like I said, make sure you're very sure about your team. And we obviously do this. We give you your team archetype. We give you your 3-year outlook. So you are 100% sure that you can move your first. A lot of teams we say, don't move your first. A lot of teams we say, move your first, right? It's very different.
It's very conditional.
And it's very conditional, not only on like, oh, I have a lot of high scoring assets. There's a ton. We can tell you, you get the My Teams, you get the trade calculator, you get our rankings, you get our Dynasty Discord, all of that at flockfantasy.com. Plus, you get a team blueprint for free when you sign up for the annual Mother Flocker tier. In the team blueprint, we give you your 3-year outlook, we give you your team archetype, we tell you your positional grades, we tell you what players specifically to target for your Dynasty team. It's everything you need to make sure you're going to be winning your Dynasty League, not only this year, but for years after, which is also important. You get a free blueprint, like I said, with the annual Mother Flocker tier at flockfantasy.com/domain. Link is going to be in the pinned comment in the description. If you want to go there and become an annual Mother Flocker, like I said, you get a free team blueprint, or you can also buy a team blueprint no matter your membership. But I've talked too much, and now my voice hurts. So talk about first for non-contending teams.
So I kind of want to walk into this a different way, approach this a different way. And when you're talking about rebuilders and them targeting 25 first, I think that the one key thing that you need to understand here as a rebuild and as a contender is that you are on entirely different paths. You are entirely different situation as a rebuild. You are not focusing on production. You are not focusing on any of that. You are focusing on whether you're scoring 150 points in a week or scoring 50 points in a week as a rebuild or a reload. You care about value and you care about getting those rookie picks. This is the perfect time where it is the most mutually beneficial for a contender to move off of a pick, give it to a rebuild who will in exchange give them a productive asset. And that I think is really important to nail down. Work with your contenders in your league. If you're a rebuild, leverage their need to get production and higher upside flex options, right? This is something, and don't try to fleece them, right? Try to be reasonable. If someone is top 3 in their league and you're like, hey, I'll give you this guy if you give me your first, like more often than not, people are going to want to jump on that because, like Avery already alluded to, this is going to help them make a push in the playoffs. This is going to help them potentially get that first round bye. So make sure that you are offloading those guys and taking advantage. But don't go too crazy and offload productive young cornerstone assets. It's okay to hold some of those players there. Keep in mind that early and mid first do gain more value initially, so the value of a late first is going to be a bit more reasonable. You're not going to have to pay a crazy price to go target an early or mid first. I can't tell you how many times as rebuilders help so many rebuilds with their team blueprints and just advice in general. Cannot tell you how many times those rebuilders have overpaid to target projected early to mid firsts. It drives me up a wall. Just go get a general first. Just go I don't care if it's a contender. I don't care if you think that he's going to win the league. The playoffs are total parity. even in Dynasty Fantasy Football. The gaps are bigger, the tiers are bigger with some of those productive guys versus middle of the road contenders. But still, like I would rather you pay a reasonable price for the 10th, 11th overall pick than go crazy to pay for a projected top 3 pick that ends up being the 6th overall pick. You don't want to be doing that right now in the middle of the season when a lot of things haven't been determined there. So first are always gold. Make sure you're keeping that in mind. Don't approach targeting a contender 25 first, assuming that you're going to hold it all the way through the draft, and then you keep it and you hope that rookie that you draft ends up producing for you and ends up going crazy. Remember that it's all about value, and what you care about most is getting that 25 first before it increases in value. The reason late firsts are such a good target right now is because generally their value jump happens deeper in the offseason than early to mid first, because we have a better idea of the top 6 prospects in college right now. 7 to 18 is a lot more up in the air, a lot more unknown, and we don't really know the depth of the class. We don't really know what positions are going to be in high demand at those specific price points, which is why it takes a little more time for those late 25 firsts to happen. Now with Dynasty in the market, everyone gets excited about the late first regardless of what the class ends up looking like. If it's deep, if it's not, it doesn't matter. It's going to go up in price. But just keep that in mind, that you are going to benefit from going and getting those late firsts right now. It can come down to just being lucky in the playoffs. So that's another thing. If you're targeting a projected late first, it could end up being mid. It could be 6, 7, 8 instead of 9, 10, 11. It just takes one loss in the playoffs. Now I want to flip back to the contending side of this, because again, I just touched on what rebuilds should be doing and how they should be targeting these first. If you are a contender and you are considering moving your first for a player like Avery's already touched on, I want you to understand this. Like this is so important to understand. If you are 4-4, if you are 5-3, and you are 4th, 5th, or 6th in points for right now, and that's really not that much of a difference between 7, 8, and 9, you are not one move away. You are never one move away from being a top high-end competitor in your league. If you think that all it's going to take is you moving your first to get a leg up on everyone else and to get into that top tier, more often than not, it's not going to be true, and it actually is going to cost the value of your team long term, and you're going to be in a world of hurt. We have done this before. I have done this before. I have thought that I am one move away from being one of the top competitors in the league, and that all I have to do to get to the playoffs, and I end up missing the playoffs by a game. I end up missing the playoffs by a couple of points for. I end up missing for whatever reason, or I even get to the playoffs, crawl to the playoffs, and I lose in the first round, and I'm screwed for the foreseeable future. Make sure you're not selling your future when you are a fringe playoff team, okay? It is mutually beneficial a lot of times for these contenders to move their firsts to get to really separate themselves from the rest of the league heading into the playoffs. This is conditional. This is not always the case. Make sure that you're only moving off your 25 first when you are certain that you are a top team. Avery has already said this. I am touching on it again because it is so important to understand heading into week 9 of the season. If you are 5-3 or 4-4, let's wait a little bit longer to figure out what your team's going to look like heading into Thanksgiving, right? Heading into December. Don't just float. Make sure you have a plan. So even though we're telling you fringe playoff teams to wait a little bit before you figure out what to do with your future first, and if you should make a heavy contending push, make sure that you do have a plan. Make sure you have a target week on, like, okay, this is the point where I'm going to make a decision. This is the point where I'm going to start moving some of the reload-friendly assets that I can't really start right now to rebuilding teams to get some more contending assets. Make sure you have a plan, knowing who you're going to move off of, when, and what rebuilds to target, who you're going to exploit. Go look at the needs that these rebuilding teams have and take advantage of that. And that is going to relate to some of the targets that we do have for rebuilders and reloaders alike in this sort of situation. If you are a rebuilder and you're trying to build up wide receiver, which we generally recommend, you're trying to build up quarterback in superflex leagues, which we generally recommend for guys that have decent value upside. Some of the guys we're going to have you target here are going to include Lab McConkey and Keon Coleman. They're both rookie wide receivers right now that haven't gone absolutely nuclear or anything like that, but they are in decent situations to be productive in the future, and they are not being valued currently at their value ceiling. They're decent targets at the moment, and they're targets that a decent amount of contenders could own because they expected them to produce this year as rookies, and they haven't been as reliable. You're going to have contenders that are going to be a little more willing to move off of guys like Lab McConkey and Keon Coleman for more reliable contending options at running back or wide receiver. Chris Godwin, even though he's a little bit older, I think he's like 28, 29 years old at this point, he's a great target for a reload, especially if you're just folding for the year and trying to build up for 2025. Godwin's going to come back healthy. He's going to be fine. There wasn't a lot of structural damage with that injury, which was shocking to me. Ended up being just a dislocation. Heck, if they make a deep playoff run, he could end up coming back potentially. So we'll see what happens there. And then quarterbacks, J.J. McCarthy and Michael Penix, I think, are perfect here. You obviously are seeing a lot of 2024 rookies here. We're not telling you to target rookies all the time. These are just guys that right now, their current price in the middle of the season merits you targeting them because you know without a shadow of a doubt that every single one of these assets is going to increase in value as we head into the offseason because people start diving into efficiency metrics. People start diving into numbers, diving into situations. And McCarthy and Penix are guys that are automatically going to go up in price.
Yeah. So I think one thing that we need to kind of wrap up with here that's really important is if you are pursuing 25 firsts on a rebuild, if you're trading for 25 firsts, don't get so caught up in rookies and 25 firsts that you completely give away all of the proven production on your team. Because like Nathan was talking about, the hit rate for 25 firsts is low enough that you are taking on a fair amount of risk if you hold those picks all the way to the draft. And like he said, you don't want to be holding those picks all the way to the draft. But even over investing in picks can be risky because you could get to the draft and have 7 first-round picks in a 12-team league, but then nobody wants to take them off your hands if the class gets a negative publicity or is disappointing. Normally that doesn't happen, but I have seen people overinvest. It is a lot easier to move off of half your first when you have 4 firsts rather than when you have 8 firsts, right? And you don't want to get caught in taking essentially 50-50 shots on prospects in the rookie draft because you are decreasing the likelihood that you will be able to contend the year after. We want people to have 1 year reloads, 1 year rebuilds, and then go and contend and win money the year after they do that. And so when you are acquiring 25 firsts and you're acquiring multiple 25 firsts, the sweet spot's going to be like 25 to 35% of your first round. Meaning if you play in a 12-team league, don't have any more, in my opinion, than 3 to 4 firsts. That's a good amount to have on a rebuild. That's when we look at that and we say that's a really good draft capital score, right?
And spread out your value across those picks and guys that are younger that you know have not reached their value ceiling, like Rashee Rice and Brandon Ayuk at the moment.
Like you definitely want to target injured stars like Rashee Rice and Brandon Ayuk before you target 25 first on rebuilds.
Yep.
The players are much more valuable. The players that, if you have proven players that you know are going to go back up in value, that is far more valuable to a rebuild than it is a pick, which will go up in value. But then if you get to the point where you make the pick, then it's a lottery. It seriously is. Even if it's a high percentage lottery pick in the first round where you're picking in the top 5 picks, you know it could be somebody who does pan out. It still is less likely than somebody like Rashee Rice, who you know has a 90% chance when he comes back of being productive and maintaining his dynasty value.
All y'all rebuilders, you are not going to see any more common players than Rashee Rice and Brandon Ayuk as the most consistent targets we have in blueprints for rebuilders and reloaders because it's not even a question. And again, it's a mutually beneficial move. You're going to have a lot of contenders that owned Brandon Ayuk and Rashee Rice that expected them to produce, that expected them to be in their starting lineup every single week, and unfortunately lost both of them. And they're going to have to offload them potentially to really raise the upside of their flex positions there, and they'll give them to you as rebuilds.
Yeah. So again, with 25 firsts, lots to talk about there, but they are really important, so make sure you're being careful with those. Like I said, we can help you tell you what to do specifically with your 25 firsts. Give you your team archetype, give you your 3-year outlook, tell you what to do this year. Flockfantasy.com/domain. You get all the site features, the rankings of my teams, all of that when you get the annual Mother Flocker tier. When you use code domain, it gets you 30% off everything, including a membership, and you get the annual tier. You get a free team blueprint, which you can upgrade to a live team blueprint, a 2.0 if you want to, but a blueprint is going to be what helps you decide what to do with your first and what to do with your team overall. So like I said, flockfantasy.com/domain. We appreciate you guys. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you later.